Hi, everyone.
You caught us drinking again.
Caught us drinking again. We're crushing a bottle of this Valdiguié. It's really good. I like this new vintage.
Yeah. It's really fun. Hello, everybody. I'm Rory Williams, owner and winemaker of Frog Sleep Winery.
And I'm John Williams, owner and winemaker. And we're going to talk about what it means to be winemaker.
We'll get down to that because I don't think we have either of us in the room, actually.
And we are crushing a bottle of this Valdiguié, which isn't part of the tasting today, but we had to try it ourselves just to see how it was aging.
Yeah.
And it's aging pretty darn good.
Pretty well, yeah. So this is, just so you guys know, this is kind of a new fun wine for us, Valdiguié, which if you guys have stuck around with us for a little while, you know that we've been making a rosé for a long time, and these same grapes that go into this wine were kind of the original idea behind the rosé.
Well, mostly we couldn't get them right, but you've taken that vineyard on, and
we can't get them right anymore now than we did then.
Enough to make a pretty cool red wine, I'll say that much. Yeah.
So this is a block at our Rossi vineyard that was planted in 1947. And this is, so these are the oldest grapes we farm at Frog Sleep by a decent margin. And these are just, Valdiguié used to be known as, or old timers here will call it Napa Gamay. It's, a pretty strange grape, pretty idiosyncratic. Doesn't get a lot of sugar, it keeps a very high acid. They planted it back in the day because the bunches and the berries
So why did we call it Valdiguié?
Well, that's the original French name for it. Of course, the French don't grow it either anymore, so it's basically just a rare grape. But the vines are old and they're beautiful and they're kind of this living connection.
I kind of object to that because I fall somewhere between 47 and 54. And
we also have a block of Valdiguié planted in 1954, and that's the young vine block.
There we go. So I don't get it either way. Well, it's delicious and it's fun to have, and we've been drinking up because there's not much left, I understand.
This is a pretty small block. We only make about 80 cases of this wine. I think there's only a little bit left. We just released it the other day, and my wife Molly makes sure that I come home with a case of it every year because she loves it so much. It's very, very lightweight, super light with the fruit. This kind of smells like, has this kind of like cherry cola note to it on the nose. It's super lightweight, super low in alcohol, pretty high in acid. So we drink it always chilled down. I love it with a burger. It's kind of just a fun summer wine, basically.
I think it's a little more than that. This vintage, last vintage was definitely the cherry cola. This is definitely got hints of the South of France in it.
Is that how they pronounce it in the South of France?
Back to France.
Oh, that's France. But just kind of a fun wine that we had in our glass when we kicked off the tasting, and we hope you guys
We've been drinking,
check it out too.
Yeah. I'll tell you, we're right in the middle of harvest. What do we got? Maybe 2-3 weeks left, Rory?
If that. Kind of 2-3 weeks of nice, easy picking right now. We're kind of past I feel like we're past the hump of really.
Well, I'll tell you, I'm glad we are. I'm exhausted. It has been another wild one here in the Napa Valley. We've had a few curveballs that we've kind of gotten used to. No wildfires, thank goodness, but we got almost 2 inches of rain a few nights ago, and that followed that intense heat spell.
So
it's been interesting.
It's been a really interesting vintage. I was just talking about it with one of my friends, another winemaker in the valley here the other day, that generally around the valley, if you see bags under our eyes, it's because most people around here are pretty tired right now. Lots of people are a little bit cranky because of all the heat and then the rain weirdness. But I was talking to my friend, and I kind of feel like we're on the same page where I'm pretty excited about this vintage. Everything that's been rolling in has been, I don't know, for me, just very classical. I was out on the crush pad the other day. I'll say this. I was out on the crush pad. We were receiving grapes, and I just get this blast of kind of like floral, fruity aroma. I'm going, what's going on? Like where's that coming from? And it was Rossi Cabernet, an early lot of Rossi Cabernet getting pressed off, and it was the smell of the wine hitting the press pan from 100 feet away, and I could just smell this explosive aroma. And that was kind of like, okay, that feels pretty good.
Little tiny beers again. We didn't get a lot of rain last year, so very intense fruit, but balance, really excellent balance. And we've been seeing nice acids, and the fruit condition's been pretty good, and could be all right. Yeah.
Another beautiful vintage.
Another fantastic vintage.
Obviously, every vintage is.
So what do you do? I never see you. What happened? What do you do?
I get up before you do during harvest.
Just a little bit.
So we, we were going to talk a little bit about, what the kind of flow of harvest is.
Could I have a glass of this Sauvignon Blanc?
Would you please? You're the one with the hand next to it here. Getting thirsty here. Talking about the flow of harvest, and something you've always taught me, Dad, is just harvest is this flow. It's this rhythm. It's not a start and stop. It almost doesn't exist in discrete moments. It's just this flow from day to day, and you're trying to kind of capture that rhythm. And you've talked about it before, like if one of us has to leave for a couple days for whatever reason in the middle of harvest, you feel like you're plucked out of that flow.
Yeah, I mean, I had to go down south for 2 days, and I flew back early just because I couldn't stand to be away from it almost.
Yeah, you want to be in the middle of it. But part of that flow for me usually starts with the vineyard crew when we get going with picking, which is anywhere between 3 or 5 o'clock in the morning is when we'll start picking. And so I'm up helping coordinate the picks and make sure we're picking in the right place, and replacing headlamp batteries and all the kind of little stuff where you can't pick at night if your batteries don't, if your headlamp's dead. So it's little stuff like that. I'm always texting with Pablo, who's in the winery early. He's one of the first ones to arrive in the winery, telling him, hey, this is how many bins are going to arrive. Let's coordinate. Hey, this block's a little heavier. This block's a little lighter.
Keeping the crew straight, all that sort of stuff.
Keeping everything straight with that. And that's kind of job number one for me during the day, is making sure that we have grapes to pick.
And then later in the day, you've got to make sure all the tractors and everything are staged for the next day's pick. You got enough bins there, so on and so forth.
Yeah.
I think my primary job is scheduling the fruit. So, and it is a fairly complex project to know what you're going to be picking, not only the next day, but really kind of looking out a few days. And we do that. It's a combined effort, obviously. Frank leads. Does all the early sampling, but I get out into most vineyards, and it's kind of I make it my call to decide what we're going to be picking next, and that's can I use the word algorithm? I just
you can. Well, if you're just going to use $10 words, though, we'll have to step this up a little bit.
Oh, you started this. It's more than just the maturity of the fruit, which we measure, by the way, I go out into the vineyards and I take samples, I bring them back, with tasting the fruit while we're sampling them, bring them back to the lab, check their sugar content, their acidity content, their pH, and based on that, you start to think about, well, what are the practicalities of this? What's the weather coming up? Are we expecting a heat spell? How many grapes can you pick in a day? You got to move the equipment between vineyards. We have growers we have to schedule. They need more advance notice than we do. It's a fairly complex thought.
I'll say that if there are any executives from either Glad Package or Ziploc watching this YouTube right now, Frog's Leap is open for a sponsorship opportunity for the 2022 harvest, sponsored by Ziploc, because we go through hundreds of them during harvest because we do all berry sampling. So that means when you get to a block of, call it 1,000 vines, you're going through and sampling from 3 or 4 passes in that block and sampling 3 or 4 berries off every 10 vines or every 5 vines, and it's this very methodical trying to get a representative sample. I think something that's remarkable, and I think speaks, it's a very, kind of almost silly thing to point out, but something that I think is really important is that you do the sampling. Frank does the sampling. I do the sampling. Pablo does a little bit of sampling. Frank's daughter Lauren will sometimes sample from their vineyard. It's not something we farm out to interns or just kind of wait for the numbers to roll in kind of stuff. We feel like it's very important to be out there seeing because it's really, you're reading the vines and how they're doing. There's a big difference between a 23 bricks and the leaves are green and the vines look perky and everything's fine.
23 bricks and not ripe versus 23 bricks and overripe, but you can have both, quite frankly.
23 bricks and the basal leaves, so the bottom leaves of the vine are all yellow or brown or falling off. The vines look tired. That's a 23 bricks where you're picking it the next day. And so it's things like that are become very important for us. And I think it's kind of cool that you still are out there doing that.
I can still get out there.
It's still there you go.
Well, but this obviously leaves out the important part of getting this fruit into the winery, and that's where Pablo, our production winemaker, takes over. And my God, talk about a guy who doesn't get much rest during harvest. And Sochi, our assistant winemaker, who handles all the analysis and all the keeping records and all the tanks and all the sampling of the tanks. So it's a real combined effort. It's a wonderful time, a great crew. The crew's been really on it this year, a very seasoned crew. So it makes a huge difference. It makes it a lot of fun, and we all kind of have our roles, and then we all get together and decide a lot of things together too. So it's pretty cool. One thing I've decided is I'm going to drink more of this wine. I'm really I'm digging it. You know, it's fun.
Ted, I think it's kind of funny. We've been drinking it here for a couple of minutes. We haven't really been mentioned it. So this is the 2020 Sauvignon Blanc Concrete Aged. And as you can tell from the very fancy bottle, this is a very fancy wine for us. This is a new wine for us, really, with the 2020 concrete aged, meaning that these are grapes all fermented and aged in our concrete eggs and/or concrete cubes. A couple of cubes in there every now and then. But the real point of this, Dad, that I was kind of alluding to with the sampling is that these are individual, bits of the block that we will pick separately and ferment separately in these concrete eggs. So this is a combination of two blocks. One of them is the oldest block of Sauvignon Blanc that we have, the old, what we call Old Cane at the Rossi Vineyard, planted in 1981. And then actually a small section, I think just 7 rows of a special clone of Sauvignon Blanc at Frank Leith's ranch, highlighted on the back label.
Yeah, it's a really cool thing, you guys. We call these the Soil series. And one of the things that Rory and Jessica came up with is a little map of these two vineyards, which are almost side by side. And they've actually outlined on the back label the rows of grapes that these vines come from. So quite literally, you could, with this back label, go and and introduce yourself to the vines that these came from. The progenitor of this wine, by the way, was I managed to score one of those concrete eggs. Almost 10 years ago.
2015, yeah.
2015, and because we wanted to celebrate this Sauvignon Blanc we have at Rossi, because it was planted the same year we started the winery in 1981. Beautiful vines, but quite frankly, in the path of planting some great Cabernet Sauvignon, and we knew if we were going to keep that in, we needed to do something special with it. So some of you may remember the Rachel Rossi Reserve Sauvignon Blanc that we did, one to celebrate these vines, but two to celebrate Rachel Rossi, the founding matron of the Rossi Ranch back in 1908, and so that wine was, it was a total experiment. We took the juice, racked it, and put it into this concrete egg. The first time we'd ever had a concrete egg.
We thought we were pretty cool with the
We thought we were
egg,
pretty
yeah.
cool. We managed to jerry-rig some refrigeration onto the tank, and that tank was more sampled than just about any tank in the history of my winemaking anyway, and it was just extraordinary what we saw with this, and it really got us. It was kind of the early introduction to us of the miracle of concrete aging and its unique characteristics. And really based on that, we started getting excited about the possibility of extending that program and making a wine that wasn't such limited availability. So this round, we're making a few cases of this.
So it's about 500 cases of this, and that may grow a little bit, but really the idea with the wine is let's go out and select blocks of grapes, and it's less about, we've got to select it once grapes come in.
Yeah, so you brought that to the equation, this idea that, hey, I'm out there every day, I'm pruning these vines, I know exactly where the vigor is this year.
We're out there the whole year interacting with these vines.
You're out there.
Yeah, we tell the story that you're out
sorry.
there. All right,
Okay.
come on, don't never ruin a good story with the truth, right?
Stop.
But the idea is that we're out there selecting these vines really ahead of time and designating them for fermentation in concrete. And Mr. Slikas has a good question. What does concrete do for the wine? Exactly. And I don't know, Dad, how would you describe it?
To me, it makes it evaporate very quickly. And I think that is the primary effect of the concrete is somehow it evaporates out of the glass.
It's
more.
amazing how it happens. You know?
Yeah. I think it was a shock to us. One thing to notice about the wine is that it's not as clear, or it's not perfectly clear. So this is bottled right off the fermentation lees, but we would expect the wine to be much more clear. But what we have found in concrete, this is in an egg, but we have these square concrete tanks as well that we use, is that the wine doesn't clarify as much as you would a normal wine. It seems to keep the lees in suspension, and I think this was the shocking thing to us, is how much that adds to the texture of the wine. And so this wine has just got a fullness of it, while still keeping light and bright and beautiful. It's got a richness across the palate that's unexpected.
I think that's the main point. You hit it on the nose, Dad. Is what it's adding is umami. It's this sense of richness.
Who's mommy?
You mommy. Who mommy? This sense of of richness or kind of texture to the wine that's different from, and really important, it's different from oak or butter or sweetness or high alcohol or kind of any of the familiar trappings of how you might try to put lipstick on a pig around here of taking a wine and then give it richness by adding a little sugar and sneaking it in there. This is kind of this very, natural, very, kind of slow way of building texture in the wine, the French would call it material. It's just this breadth to the wine that, keeps its lightness, keeps the focus of the wine. And I think that's what really impressed us about the concrete is it doesn't change the wine exactly. It just augments it.
Yeah.
And it, the extended time on the lees will shift the aromas more towards kind of rich lemon curd and a little bit more minerality to the wine. Yeah. Shifts it away from kind of simple fruitiness. And so it does taste different than the regular Sauvignon Blanc in terms of aromas, but the biggest thing for me is this kind of building of texture and building of character.
It wasn't a surprise to us that keeping lees in suspension adds body. I mean, the theory of bâtonnage, the French term for stirring the lees to keep them in suspension, has been known for a long time and practiced particularly in Burgundy with their Chardonnays. They make Chardonnay in Burgundy.
I heard, yeah.
And it became, particularly one producer became very famous for this, Dominique Lafon, for introducing this idea of opening the barrel and stirring it up to keep the lees in suspension, and this added a lot of richness. What they weren't counting on was that opening up that barrel all the time and getting in and stirring it up was adding a lot of oxygen too. Mm-hmm. And I think that's the real promise of this is, and that led to too much oxygen opens the flower too quickly, and the wine can become prematurely oxidized. And that was actually a phenomenon that was going on in Burgundy for a long time, what we call premox, or premature oxidation of the white wines of Burgundy, and largely attributable, at least in my mind, to this widespread use of bâtonnage. The beauty of the concrete aging is that the tank is sealed, but somehow, and I don't think
the best thing is we don't have to go in there and start. We don't have to do anything.
Somehow it keeps the lees in suspension. We thought it was the shape of the egg, but I don't think it is.
We've run tests. We've done it in because we also have about 70 of these concrete cubes, which we're going to taste the Zinfandel maybe next, and
I think we'll
talk about that as well, because that has a lot to do with concrete. But we've noticed the exact same effect in cube as we've seen in egg. Why keep them in eggs? The eggs have little glycol lines in them, so they're easy to control with fermentation. Plus, they look like spaceships, which is pretty cool. I think they look kind of funny in the winery, and why not have a little bit of fun, basically? Yeah. But they
are hard to stack on top of each other, though.
Have we even tried? We've never even tried.
That's true. I hadn't thought about that.
But it's really been an exciting development for us because it's a way of kind of. Most Sauvignon Blanc is produced quickly and consumed very quickly. And so there's a little bit of Sauvignon Blanc that can be hidden by its youthful character. A lot of young wines will often have similar characteristics. And keeping it just a little bit of extended time, but keeping it reductive, keeping it in contact with the lees, allowing it to develop character, gives it focus while at the same time kind of stripping away some of the what you think you might have known about Sauvignon Blanc beforehand, and really brings it closer to what my paragon is with Sauvignon Blanc, which are the Cotat Sancerres and
Well, I mean, that fundamental tasting we had at La Lucette in the Loire, where we were tasting 15, 20-year-old Baron Van Els. I mean, those were extraordinary wines. It was a very eye-opening tasting for me. It's just the ageability of these. So I think the fundamental question, Rory, I'm going to put it to you, is this wine's more expensive than our regular Sauvignon Blanc. Does it mean it's better? Is this our best? So, I mean, in other words, is this we make good Sauvignon Blanc and then we make better Sauvignon Blanc because this is more expensive? Is this our best?
It gets to be a difficult question because, it's like, which of your wines do you love best kind of thing. I'd say that in the sense it's a reserve style bottling. In any kind of reserve style situation, there's some presupposition that you're selecting your best or whatever. But I think it's more like you go back to how we originally thought about the Rachel Rossi Reserve. It wasn't that Old Cane was always the best wine Sauvignon Blanc we ever made each and every year. It's that every year it was different and it was interesting on its own. I remember going out and sampling Old Cane and always had this kind of, even at low sugar levels, it had this kind of like tropical thing going on with it. And you're going, what is that? That's something different.
Yeah.
And I think this wine is an opportunity for us to stay, identify with what I love about working for Frog Leap and how I got into this in the first place, which is, keep those selections out in the vineyard. What's interesting, what's different about this little piece of soil as opposed to that piece of soil? Yeah. Not that one's necessarily better or worse.
And we put it on and you insisted on this Frog Leap soil selection, and stay tuned. We're going to have a few more wines like this coming up. We individual bottlings from each of our state Cabernet vineyards, including the home vineyard.
Yeah. But soil selection series out of Cabernet and Merlot out of Rossi as well, just because it's a way of making a wine that's, I don't know, better or worse. It's not really a way of putting it so much as that this is a form of us being able to draw out that distinctiveness that originates in the soil, that originates with the vines.
Celebration of its unique personality.
And tastes different for sure. It's funny because sometimes we get reactions where like, well, I love the Grand Cuvée Sauvignon Blanc, our standard Sauvignon Blanc, or I love this one better. I think the idea was just make something just a little bit different, but it certainly won't taste like most Sauvignon Blancs.
And I think we should add to this is that learning from this wine, and that's a big part of these wines as well, is that we learn from them, and we are now actually have gotten excited. We've invested in a number of these eggs. And we're looking to increase the amount of the concrete fermented and aged Sauvignon Blanc into our Grand Cuvée, into our regular Cuvée of Sauvignon Blanc. Yeah. And so a way to kind of, just keep growing, getting better, keep it more interesting.
I think we mentioned it in the summer tasting, but the 21 SB was about 2% concrete. The 22 Sauvignon Blanc will be about 7 to 9% concrete, up to maybe even up to 10% concrete. And there's a goal in the future, probably not moving that wine entirely to concrete, but a certain percentage of it being used to add depth to the wine, even after 40 years, making the wine better and better. So,
I think it's a perfect introduction actually to the Zinfandel, which is another wine we age a lot of it in concrete, in the concrete cubes, and that's been an extraordinary revelation to us as well. So this is a first tasting of our 2020 Zinfandel, which you guys are going to get your hands on soon if you haven't already. We're very excited about it. And two things that are unique about this wine. We've talked about this in our Zinfandels, but this one is almost 60, 70% aged in the concrete square tanks that we have that hold about 4 barrels of wine, or 240 gallons of wine. And same thing. I remember the first tasting we were doing when we were sampling all these. We had the same wine in barrels, and we had it in these concrete cubes, and the extraordinary difference across every lot showed an increased richness across the palate.
That was one of the coolest tastings. It was done at we intentionally put ourselves in this position for these tastings because we did it at like 7 o'clock in the morning or something on a Tuesday, and which is about when you like wine the least, basically. But it was.
Speak for yourself.
Come on. Well, maybe 8 a.m.
Yeah.
tasting.
Oh, no, that's
Yeah,
better.
no, that's totally different. But it was this extraordinary kind of impact kind of tasting where you're going. At that point, I think we only had 10% of the Zin in concrete, so it was a very, very small percentage of it. But tasting these things side by side, because we were trying to make decisions about whether we wanted to keep going with this, or was just a dumb thing that we invested in that was kind of a fun experiment and no further. And it was the same, what we were talking about with the Sauvignon Blanc, where it wasn't, instead of stripping away character or I think worse, adding some kind of weird element to it, like I don't think you'd want it to literally taste like concrete,
No. Unlike a barrel where you actually want it to taste a little bit like the oak.
But it was this vessel that wasn't, it wasn't impacting aroma in like this direct way where it was adding some character or something like that. But instead, it was impacting the wine in a very subtle, kind of behind the scenes kind of way. And it was taking everything that we loved about Zinfandel and just locking it in. And at the same time, giving the wine tons of richness. And that kind of richness is, just speaking as winemakers for a bit, that's why you use new oak, and why we would use new oak in, for example, our Cabernet. The only real purpose of it isn't to add oak aroma. That's almost a defect of a barrel, in my opinion. But a well-made new oak barrel will add this kind of mid-palate richness. It will add a kind of, not sweetness exactly, but some breadth and some umami to the palate. And that's a huge part of why those tools are used. With Zinfandel, it's very sensitive to that new oak aroma. So it'll just suck up any new oak you throw out. It's going to suck up that aroma, and we found that we only liked 5 to 10% new oak in the Zinfandel, and that was kind of like just because you had to have some more barrels in your system. But we also didn't like Zinfandel in these really, really old barrels.
Yeah, so it was a problem. Because
you got to put it in something.
I think Gary Dyer had an interesting observation that this wine actually tastes sweeter, and believe me, Gary, it's not sweet. It is that textural component that you're really getting here, and it gives a richness across the palate that's quite exciting in the wine without having any sweetness, which you don't really want because that doesn't age well, that doesn't drink well, and it gives you headaches. This is just that textural component coming.
If you want some sweet, it's really good with like a Coke mixed into it.
Stop it!
Like
It's not.
Have you tried it?
Dr. Pepper, but I mean.
No, because Gary, I definitely agree with you. He's saying there's a little more sweetness, and whether it's the Carignan or anything like that, I think some of it is vintage. 2020 was this very moderate, very regular summer that gives, to me, years where you have huge heat spikes or very cold spells during the years when it'll kind of send tannins in a weird way. The 17, I remember being very challenging as a result because of all that tannic weirdness with the wine. But 2020 was this nice, regular vintage. I heard some crazy things in the world were going on in 2020, but to the Zinfandel, it didn't matter. But there was no excess, no different amount of new oak. I think this was a record low new oak usage for us. A little bit of extra Carignan, I think, helps bring up the acid, but I think it's mainly this kind of vintage condition and then the concrete really adding this sense of what you might call sweetness or richness or umami that isn't actually sugar. It isn't actually some kind of addition to the wine so much as just revealing this kind of softness.
Remind me, what was the vintage where we discovered this idea of refrigerating the Petit Syrah must and then injecting it into the fermentation? It was about this time, wasn't it? A little early.
17 or 18, I think.
17 or 18. Oh boy, years are going by. So as you guys know, we've believed for many, many years at Frog's Leap that the way to get a wine to taste more like Zinfandel is to have less Zinfandel in it. And so this wine has got a substantial blending of primarily Petit Syrah, but also a little Carignan. And almost to the point that it endangers the varietal. I don't know what it says. Does it say on the label?
Yeah, we shouldn't actually state it, just in case anybody from the TTB is watching.
Oh, no, it's legal.
No, but you're right on, and what you're on about is that for years we had what we had done.
Technically out of compliance with this one.
I don't know. Why are you asking?
Well, no one listens to this.
Yeah,
It
don't
doesn't
ask
matter.
questions. Come on.
Okay, we need everyone on the chat to sign
Forget
in and
everything
say,
you've heard.
and just say, we didn't hear any of that. Love it,
You know, what we're doing here, and what we had done for years with the co-fermentation, so the Petit Syrah and the Zinfandel are co-fermented together. But
What do you mean co-fermented? So you like ferment them and then you mix them
I was about to
together?
explain it.
Oh, you are, okay. Can I just sit here and drink for a while?
Would you mind? So it used to be that we would go in, our Zinfandel grapes are mostly grown up in the St. Helena appellation, which is a whole 5 miles north of us, while most of our Petit Syrah is grown here in Rutherford, especially for this wine. It was mostly our Galleran vineyard. And what we used to do for years was drive up to St. Helena early, pick a bunch of Zinfandel, get in our cars, and then drive down to Rutherford and pick like a couple bins of Petit Syrah, the daily bread for the Zinfandel co-fermentation.
The guys love that.
The guys were about to murder me, and I was about to just murder myself with this because it's a harvest is crazy. It's this kind of very active phase of the year, obviously, and you get tired, you get a little cranky, and so the idea of picking, getting covered in grape juice and dirt and tired after hours of picking, and then getting in your car and then doing it again is not anybody's idea.
For a box of grapes.
For a box of grapes.
Yeah.
So you came up, I'll give you full credit, Doug, you came up with this idea of, and the real issue we were having is that Petit Syrah tends to ripen.
Yeah, I was going to say, I didn't do it to convenience the crew. I did it because I thought.
You did it because Petit Syrah tends to ripen just a little bit ahead of Zinfandel, which is a problem because that meant that when the Zinfandel was ready to pick, the Petit Syrah was a little over ready to pick. And so it would be a little too ripe, and that's not what we wanted out of it.
Exactly the opposite, actually.
Yeah. But we didn't want to, and we tried this as well, why not just pick the Petit Syrah and ferment it separately and then blend it? And the real issue with that is that Petit Syrah on its own can get, as you may have had, if you've tried our Petit Syrah or other Petit Syrahs, it's a very tannic grape, and occasionally these wines would get out of control tannic, and when it seemed as though when you did like a bench top, just straight blending of pure Zinfandel and pure Petit Syrah, it doesn't work.
And it's not the same.
It's not the same. It doesn't have that kind of sweetness to the center of the wine. Instead, you kind of have this, very fruity Zinfandel, and then on the sidelines, but clearly defined, this very tannic little element.
Tick tock, and
so you came up with this idea of let's pick the Petit Syrah, but hold it and cold soak it for the entire week before the Zinfandels are ready. And so that's what we do. We pick all the Petit Syrah about a week ahead of the Zinfandels. It comes into tank. It sits there at about 35 degrees for a whole week, getting pumped over, getting mixed, cold soaking or cold extracting. It ends up looking. Petit Syrah is a very dark grape, and so it ends up looking like motor oil by the time you're ready to mix it with the Zinfandel. A week later, the Zinfandels start rolling in. As soon as they start to ferment, and as soon as they start to get hot in the tank, during a pump over, we'll mix in some of that Petit Syrah, and it's like this alchemical kind of just everything bubbles at the same time.
It's an orgy.
I don't think you're allowed to say that on YouTube Live, are you?
Maybe. There we go. Two demerits for me today.
I was going to say it was going to bubble like Macbeth's cauldron. It was going to like a slightly more classy reference, but yeah, go ahead.
We're in love with our Zinfandel, you guys. We could sit here and talk about Zinfandel all day, what we're doing with the concrete, what we're doing with this co-fermentation, what we're doing with this cold soaking, what we're doing with the vineyards themselves, the reduced yields we've had the last few years with the drought have made, albeit a very small amount, but some very intense and wonderful Zinfandels. We've let these run to just a little bit higher alcohol than we had in the past, so these are over 14%, but in the world of Zinfandel, still moderate and very drinkable, and I think extraordinarily ageable Zinfandels for years to come. So,
I think we're pretty happy with where it's at, and I think that's where the concrete is really coming in handy, just because Zin is about this just pure joy of wine. It should be this, capture this essence of summer fruit, and it should be this very just joyful experience drinking a Zinfandel. And so it's why it's especially depressing when it's heavy and very alcoholic and low acid and no fun.
So a lot of people like those wines. I have friends who even make those wines and love them.
You have friends?
I have friends.
Oh, okay. But the concrete kind of helps.
I might not after this. We offer this in 375s. Do you have any reason why we would do that? Yeah.
Well, some people don't like to drink an entire bottle of wine by themselves.
Communists.
I know, communists. Yeah. It's amazing to think, huh?
There was a question about 375s, and actually I had lunch at Bouchon yesterday, and there was a 375 bottle of our Merlot being enjoyed at the table next to me. I could barely contain
and
myself.
you had the 750 right now.
No, of course I did. No, 375s are a great option for a lot of people, we love to have them at home. Tori.
I like two of them.
No, that doesn't count. But the question is, do they age differently? And I think the answer is yes.
Yeah, they do.
For better or worse in some cases.
Yeah.
And so it's not like, I remember a tasting with our tasting group. Kathy Corson put this tasting together, and she served at the tasting blind. We had no idea the wines were decanted came out. She served a 375, a 750, a Magnum, and a 3-liter side by side of the same wine from the same vintage, 10 years old. None of us could guess that it was the same wine.
Huh.
So it does have a profound impact on the wine. We all loved them. They were all great. I don't know that anyone said, well, these are different shaped by the side. No, I know no one did. But it was a lesson to me in the idea that it does make an impact, and it's just the amount of oxidation that you're getting. Remember what's happening in the bottle is this opening of the flower, and the flower was just a little bit more open on the 375, and so.
That can be either a good thing or a bad thing, and I don't know that it's not like a linear kind of thing, right? Where this one is exact, because you're not necessarily measuring the same thing. It's not so much that it sucks down here and it's getting better, and it's
that's what we learned about aging in general.
Yeah, it just gets different, and as oxygen comes in contact with the wine, thousands of things are changing in the wine at the same time. The tannins are polymerizing, the aromas are either oxidizing or they're just changing.
I love this idea that wine's still living in the bottle and still developing in the bottle, and still it's part of its terroir. It's another actor, right, in the personality of these wines.
And it may be that the total lifespan of any given wine in a 375 is going to be less than it would be in a 750 or in a larger size, but sometimes that timeline is really, really, really long. I remember having a 1941 Bordeaux out of half bottle. This was about 15 years ago, and it was really good. And you're going, didn't really suffer at all from. I mean, not that I was in a position to compare it to the 750, but it was really cool to taste it out of half bottle. So. It's not like it's an instant paperweight if it's more than 20 or 30 years old. And sometimes it could just be a cool way.
Unlike people, is that what you're?
I didn't say that. Are you just speaking whatever's coming into your head?
I had that 52 Pichon Milan the other night with Mr. Greenberg.
Tell me all about it, Don.
I meant to write you a note to tell you how wonderful it was, actually.
Would you please still do that? Because I'm really keen to hear what you thought about this wine that you drank without me.
So to finish on the Zinfandel, absolutely delicious. Going to age forever. 86% Zinfandel, 9% Petit Syrah, and 7% Carignan. Now that you've alerted the authorities.
Are the lees suspended with the Zinfandel as well in concrete? Yes, they are.
And that's what we couldn't believe.
That was something that we at first we were a little annoyed because we were going to rack everything and doing all our normal rackings, and there was no point to racking it when it was in concrete because you wouldn't. The whole point of racking is to separate clear wine that's on top from the lees that fall to the bottom, which only works if the lees fall to the bottom.
Yeah.
And they had not, and so it was this cloudy wine. This is in February that we're looking at these. So a few months after it was made. All the wine in barrel was very clear, was ready to be racked, was tasting really good, but all the stuff in concrete was reductive. It tasted like it had just gone into that tank, as if it had just gotten out of the fermenter and gone straight in there. So it had kind of locked the wine in time in a way. And the lees were still developing. it tasted a little. I remember it smelling a little funky, because the lees are in there. They're
It was
kind
a
of
little more reductive.
a little more reductive, and
Yeah.
it wasn't necessarily something you put in the bottle that day, but you could smell the promise of that wine, and that was what was very unusual. You would never do batonnage with a red wine, but this was sort of like a reductive version of batonnage with Zinfandel, which is kind of definitely a strange thing. So.
Well, strange and wonderful. I don't want to give the impression that we've given up on oak barrels. That they still play a very important role in our winemaking, particularly in our Cabernet Sauvignon and Merlot. There's no substitute for the value a well-coopered oak barrel can bring to this. They have a few problems. One, certainly their ecological footprint. Two, they're very expensive. It's our largest capital expense every year. Three, they have a very limited lifespan. It's not that we're trying to eliminate the use of oak barrels in the winery. We just want to use them more carefully and more thoughtfully. And to me, obviously two things happen in a barrel. One, this low transfer of oxygen, this the élevage or the raising of the wine. And that we're getting in the concrete. That can be largely substituted in the concrete. But of course there's a flavor of the barrel itself that gets into the wine. And I don't want to say that we want to totally go without that. To me, oak and wine is a little bit like cologne or perfume on a person. If you can smell it, there's too much. But without it, you miss it, basically.
No, I think that's right, Dad. And it's, I said earlier, new oak flavor is this kind of defect. When it's in excess, kind of like when someone wears too much cologne, it is a defect.
Yeah,
but
like my Brut aftershave.
Yeah. Let's not talk about
I don't use aftershave as much as I used to.
I know my aftershave is. I was going to say that I'm not going to shave my beard until the Valdiguié is sold out. So for the sake of everybody around me, please.
That's only going to be about another few days, I understand.
Perfect. That's fine with me, actually. But no, new oak, and what we found that it is, so take something like Zinfandel, where we say, we only like 7 to 10% new oak in the Zinfandel, but that varies greatly depending upon the specific wine. So many of you have had the Molinari Vineyard Fellowship wines that we put out the last few years. That vineyard, which tends to run a little bit riper, tends to run a little bit more intense, loves more like 20% new oak, or even up to 30% in some blocks.
Well, and we found this with our Cabernet lots too.
Oh yeah, all over the place. Whereas
Speaking of Cabernet.
White Barn will be more like 3 to 5%. And so it's this taking that all into balance. Cabernet is honestly anywhere between 0 and 100%.
Yeah.
I mean, it really does vary that much.
Well, look, let's move on to the main event here. I'm so excited to try this wine. You know what? It seems like this wine is 100 years old. 2016. That's all.
We were chatting before we went live today, and we were trying to think. What do we remember about 2016? And we both kind of had the same feeling about. I should mention we're tasting the 2016 Cabernet is in our glass, and for me, remembering vintages is more about this kind of emotional feeling that comes with it. And the emotion I attach with 16 nowadays is it feels pre-modern in a way, where it's like
pre-modern or
pre-modern. Pre-modern.
Pre-modern, yeah.
Where it's like 2017 on. You described it as a loss of innocence with the fires in 17, and then drought kicking. Big heat. 18 was perfect, but then 19 kicked off a big heat year. 2020 with the fires, and then drought in 20 and 21, and then just craziness everywhere. 16 was just this.
Well, in our world.
2016 was just this, at least through harvest, was this very moderate year, cool year, plenty of rainfall. This was kind of coming out of the 14, 15 drought years. I think this is, entering just a beautiful phase of its life. Basically, this is now. With our Cabernets, I feel like our Cabernets drink really well for, a couple of years after release. And then they get a little quiet right now. They can get a little quiet and they can start to dumb down. And then like great Bordeaux, they'll start to rise again. And this one is on the rise again. The 15 was another example of a wine that was closed up for a very long time.
Well, this is in its stride right now. A beautiful wine. It has a little bit of Merlot in it from this vintage, as I remember. which is unusual in our cab blend. We just talk a little bit about how we make those decisions, but just a delicious wine. It really does seem like an aged innocence to me, and just beautiful. The French oak in this wine. You were. I have to give a little credit every now and then to Rory, but he took over our barrel management program and started to make decisions about what coopers we used based on I had an algorithm that was more based on my visits to France.
Who's going to give me the nicest swag? You know?
No, I was never influenced by that, but you
don't care about the hats and the vests.
No, but lunches when I was in Burgundy were pretty nice. I will say that. Yeah. So
they haven't yet found out who makes the barrel decision, so I haven't been treated to any.
I'm trying to keep it.
I assume you keep them all to yourself.
Well, we haven't been able to travel, but you put a lot more thought into how we select our coopers. Can you talk a little bit about the cooperage in this wine?
Yeah, absolutely. So this is all French oak, but this is a great example of what cooperage can do for a wine, where this wine is invisible to new oak. You're not going to get a huge blast of new oak off of this wine, but that oak is still giving, what it does when it's in its best form is it gives transparency to everything that is lovely about the different blocks of grapes. And, it's funny, tasting, sometimes we'll be out there in the cellar doing barrel tastings, and which we don't do a whole lot of with guests or anything like that, but obviously we taste out of barrel a lot, and we'll taste the same wine out of different ages of barrels. And you definitely can get that feeling when it's perfectly done, when oak is doing its best job, even at 100%, it's invisible. And instead of you tasting the cooperage or anything like that, what you're doing is you're tasting this augmented version of the wine, and it really props up what's special and interesting about that block of grapes. And every single block of grapes has its own affinity for new oak, and often for different percentages of new oak from different forests and different toast levels. And it goes down this rabbit hole of coopers and all this stuff where...
Are you finding a consistent year in, year out that the Troy works best with this block of Rossi or something like that? Or is that a work in progress?
No, exactly. We've found that Troy, which is a cooperage, they're MLT, they're medium long toast barrels from a certain age of stave, will do really well as new oak with some of the middle blocks of Red Barn Cabernet here at the winery. When they're in their second use, they do really well with West Side fruit. This is an example of one of those. I could go down a rabbit hole with any number of these. Name a cooper. It'll appear to do really, really poorly with one thing, and it'll do very, very well with another. And that's kind of the puzzle that goes on with barrels, where you're always looking to not have the barrel, make an imprint upon the wine, but instead allow the wine to just express itself louder. And when it's, we've found on average that means that we end up with a wine that's about 20 to 25% new oak. But it's not like we're going in there and making sure every single block has 25% new oak. It would not work well that way, because some blocks that would be way too much, and for some blocks it would be way too little. And so this is kind of the effort. We're buying a few hundred new barrels every year.
So first of all, Sharon, I agree with you. This 2016 cab is damn near perfect at this point in its aging, and to me, what's beautiful about it is its pure Rutherfordness. We talk about this all the time. This idea that this wine has got that earthy, dusty character that is just so Rutherford, and it's part of this whole concept of the personality of the wine, or the terroir of the wine. And it brings a question to mind as you talk about this oak. Does then oak enter into the terroir of the wine? Because the French would say it's about the soil and about the inherent quality of the grape, not about the things that happen after you process the wine. I think I hear your argument that that's another actor in the wine and is part of its terroir. But how do you come down on that?
Well, I think it can be either a tool for enhancing terroir. It can be, terroir being this idea that what
So it could be a mask for terroir, or it could be an augment to terroir. Is that what you're at?
Exactly. In the same way that a lot of the decisions you make in the winery can do the same thing.
Yeah.
Where you could say, I could say, Dad, I got this new sweet tattoo, and we're not going to add any sulfur in our wines, and we're not going to, we're going to take a dogmatic approach to a wine, and then I can either work out really well or really poorly. But this idea that you would, it's very possible as a winemaker to make a wrong decision in the winery, and really wrong decisions take the form of things that obscure terroir, that make wine taste like any other wine out there. All oxidized wines, sherry and Vin Jaune notwithstanding, all oxidized wines taste the same. They are, wines that have Klecker, run amok in them taste.
That's a spoilage yeast.
A spoilage yeast taste the same. Wines that have, 800% new oak and way too much in there and have no regard for the forests of France.
We could do a whole seminar on this. I think you're
tend to obscure
here.
terroir, and that's as much a defect as anything else. And so our job as winemakers is to make sure that you're pulling the right strings, make sure you're doing the right things that will emphasize what is special or what is interesting about a particular block of grapes. Ideally, there's something there to work with, which is kind of step one, is you have to have grapes that do taste, are worthy of the effort. But I think it's everything you're doing in the winery is really just this, you're trying to shape the environment around that wine. And so in a sense, you if it's not part of the terroir, you participate in it. You are a part of that, making that come to be. Because it's not a foregone conclusion. You can pick the grapes, and it's just as easy to put a bunch of spoilage yeast in them and put them in a bad barrel and call it terroir, and that's just not
well,
the case.
I think we could have a whole seminar on this, and involve.
I don't know that more ink needs to be spilled on terroir.
Well, it sounds like what we're getting into is natural winemaking and a bunch of other questions that are very pertinent to the industry today, and is maybe not a part of the definition of natural wine is trying not to impose on the terroir of the wine. I don't know. I think these are the questions. I think the real big question is: are we going to make it through this harvest or not? The rain we got, the heat spell we got, both challenges, both characteristics of the vintage. I think the heat spell was probably more impactful than the rain.
Yeah.
We were very, very fortunate to have installed that misting system in the vineyard. So the only thing we had, and it was national news, California or Northern California had a streak of intensely hot days, over 110 degrees during the heat of the day for multiple days in a row.
We got to 118 degrees at Rossi for a few hours, which was...
And that's not even comfortable for me, and not much less the grapes.
You're from upstate New York. Anything gets above 70 degrees, and you're out sweating.
Yeah, no, really. We were, and we've talked about this a few years ago. We installed in particularly the Rossi Ranch. We have it in our other ranches as well, particularly in our Cabernet Sauvignon. These misting systems. Many of you have been at a restaurant where in hot climates where they blow a fog up in the air and it actually cools the air. So that's what we're doing in the vineyards, and it would have been a rough vintage without that.
Yeah. So
because the grapes weren't ripe. What happens when this heat comes is that it starts to desiccate or raising the grapes. It concentrates unripe flavors, and you're kind of in trouble.
Yeah.
But we came through that, but it was by the skin of our teeth. Basically.
Yeah, but it's a lot of work even then, because you turn the system on, and then you have to go out there in 118 degree heat and fix all the ones that aren't working for whatever reason, and making sure that everything's going smoothly. So that was a very, very tiring week, getting through that crazy heat spell. And then we got 1 week of picking in, and then the rain came, which honestly the rain was. We only had Bordeaux varieties out on the vine. Merlot and Cabernet are pretty unaffected by rain. They're unlike a Zinfandel or something like that. If it had been out there in the rain, which Zin has pretty thin skins,
that would not have been good.
It's very prone to rot, especially with any kind of water in there. But Cab and Merlot kind of just shake it off. It's no big deal. So right now we're kind of in a holding pattern, just waiting for those grapes to dry off. Essentially, and we're very excited about what's going to come in. And so we're getting towards the final stages of harvest in that respect. And so we're all tired. You're a little bit cranky. I was cranky the other day, and then I cheered up, and then you got cranky right after that.
Well, we alternate crankiness. Hey, a question came across about comparing this wine with the 2016 Red Barn Cab. And honestly, I don't have an answer for you, except that I was with Paul Marini the other night, one of the investors in the winery, and he told me that he had just had a bottle of 2016 Red Barn Cabernet, and this is a guy that tastes and collects and drinks our wines all the time. He told me that 2016 Red Barn Cabernet was the best Cabernet we've ever produced. Do we have any of that left?
I don't know.
We got to find a bottle and try it. Yeah.
Gary Dyer, you asked the question. If you have an extra bottle,
Gary, invite us over to the house and let's open a bottle of that if you have any left.
So if I had to compare it, if I had to just conjecture from what I remember about the 2016 Red Barn, 2016, very cool vintage, very moderate vintage, very, what you might call a normal vintage or classical vintage. Red Barn, which is the vineyard right around our home at the winery here, tends to do really well in years like that because it has time to be on the vine. Red Barn, when it's at its best, is kind of the power element of our Cabernets, and so those cabs will tend to be a little bit. They won't be sweet, but they'll have a kind of sweeter impression, a little more black fruit, a little bit higher tannin, not quite so complex on the nose, at least at first, but instead it's this kind of, just power and intensity to the wine. Whereas what I think when we tasting the 2016, the complete blend here, this is going to have a lot, over 2/3 west side fruit from the Rossi and Leeds vineyards, and those are what add this kind of herbal floral top. I call it the herbal floral complex. This kind of top note to the wine that just explodes out of your glass with this, mixture of fruit, yes, but also, floral aromas. This what I call dried herbs, or what kind of, as the wine ages, shifts into graphite and things like that. So that's what is adding a lot of this top note complexity. I would expect the 16 at this point to still have a lot of that youthful kind of power and drive, and so that's what we're, probably if I had to compare off of what I remember with the 16, which I think was the East block that we had in that. Sharon asked, when was the last cool vintage? 2011?
Yeah, what do you mean by cool?
I mean, Napa is famous for never being especially cold, that's for sure. But 2011 was the last, cold vintage, I would say. In terms of a classically styled or, moderate vintage, 18 was a nice kind of long, very classic vintage. 2020 was going really well until nature decided to turn up the heat at the very end there during harvest with fires and lightning strikes and all this stuff. Yeah. But, the last cold vintage would have been 2011. And Viraj, you're asking, do we use French or American oak? We use French oak on the Merlot and Cabernet. We use a small amount of American oak with the Zinfandel, although that's changing. The 2022 will be the first Zinfandel with no American oak and instead just French oak in it. So that's a change that we've been moving. Used to have quite a bit of American oak in the Zinfandel, and I've been moving away from that just as I've been having a hard time finding the right, what I think is the perfect
fit. It's because
fit.
you don't get invited to dinner with any of those American oak producers.
Canton Cooperage, I'm telling you, right now, I can be bribed.
You can be a sponsor. Well, there we go. We've wasted almost another perfectly good hour of these people's time. I was going to miss this. I'm glad I didn't. This was fun. Good talk today. This is the time we have to thank our co-collaborators here. Megan is here, Megan Faulkner, running the chat room, and our technical director over here, Scott Farrell. Thank you, Scott. If this was not recorded, it is your fault, but probably to the benefit of everyone. Meanwhile, we're going to finish off these wines. Thank you guys very much. Please come visit. Amazing harvest. Almost wrapped up, but another 3 weeks of hard work, and we're going to have this one in the bag. And we look forward to seeing you at the next tasting and next quarter coming up. When's that going to be? December. Oh my gosh, Christmas is coming. Has everyone gotten their magnums yet? Oh, Megan, come here and tell everyone about the magnums. Come on. Yeah. All right. You guys got to come and see Megan. Megan's going to tell us about the magnums. Come right here, Megan.
Sure.
There we go.
Hi,
Face
everyone.
behind the camera.
Hi. Yeah, we are offering the opportunity to custom etch our 2020 Zinfandel Magnums and our 2018 Estate Grown Cabernet Sauvignon Magnums. So available now on the website, frogsleaf.com. And we have to get those orders in a couple weeks. So we have a few bottles left if you're interested.
Megan etches those herself, you
Yes,
guys, and so
handpainted.
she took
They're
that-
late at night with the
Yeah,
laser
yeah.
Put the
engraving.
kids to
Paintbrush.
bed and etch Magnum bottles.
You got it.
Yeah,
You got it.
pretty special. That's all I'm saying.
Thanks, John.
All right. Scott, you come and get in the picture here too. You take your headphones off and let's sign off here. Oh, wait, you can't sign off. I guess and be in the picture at the time. Come and just show everyone who you are. Yeah. Oh, you can't do it. Okay. Don't trip over the equipment there.
He's coming.
This is our crew, you guys, and Scott, come on up, get in the picture. There you go. And thank you guys so much. We'll have another wonderful tasting, and we'll see you the next time.
Yeah.
All right.
See you next time.
Scott, sign us off
All right.
before we say something embarrassing. All right. Take care, you guys. Have a great rest of the fall, and we'll see you on the next tasting coming up in December.
In December.
All right. Until then.